Our show tonight is medical news. It is Monday, July 28th, and welcome to the broadcast. COVID boosters correlate, according to this report that I read, with worse survival rates for cancer, with third most deaths. The study, non-public health officials are faced with new evidence that jabs accelerate the cancer with the third most deaths in the United States and a 5-year relative survival rate of 13.3%, which killed civil rights activist and Congressman John Lewis in 2020. Researchers analyzing why pancreatic cancer survival rates at their Japanese hospital declined in 2022 and 2023 after years of steady increases, guess what? Found a statistically significant connection between the number of mRNA doses taken by those patients and how quickly they died, even when considering tumor node metastasis, factors, surgery, and chemotherapy. The mRNA vaccines made by Pfizer and Moderna have a duopoly in a country like Japan, where boosters have been available to healthcare workers since December 2021. In the general public, the following month, the paper says, its boosters rate is 67%, and more than 130 million people have taken more than 4 doses. Joining us tonight is Dr. Jordan Vaughn. Dr. Jordan Vaughn is founder and president of the Microvascular Research Foundation, and also Dr. Bryan Donohue, who's a regular for us, MD, cardiologist, and founder of the Donohue Medical Consulting. Dr. Vaughn, when you hear those stats about a correlation between COVID and cancer, what does your research tell you? Because this is something that you spent your time researching.
Well, it tells me that the spike protein and then COVID in general, but also the fact that we are continuing to immune prompt a lot of people unnecessarily is causing dysfunction in our immune system. And the reality is that our immune system is responsible for more than just preventing us from getting viruses. It's involved in our ability to get rid of cells that we don't need anymore. And in a sense, when you play with the immune system, you play with more than your ability to just get the common cold. You play with your ability to get rid of cells that don't need to continue to replicate. And in a sense, increase the chances that cancer or cancerous cells can run amok.
So break this down for us. It has been dramatically increasing in kids between ages of 14 and 22 in a dramatic fashion. The cancer, just all kinds of cancers that was never seen before. How does this correlate? Is it that sometimes kids and adults take the vaccine repeatedly too many times, and there are other things that are going on in their body, illnesses that they're unaware of? What causes this from your research, Dr. Vaughn?
Well, my research specifically focuses on the unique aspects of the clotting dysfunction that happens. But the interesting thing about medicine is the clotting system is not that far removed from the inflammatory and immune system. In fact, I would actually say that they are intricately linked. And the other thing that is interesting is when you start messing with the T helper cells, the regulatory benefits of the immune system, you start to allow things to go awry. And there's lots of studies that show that, from other things like mitochondrial failure, a lot of people probably misunderstand that cancer is actually, in many ways, from a Warburg effect standpoint, a lot of things have to do with the metabolic system. And if you mess with that, you upregulate or basically increase the chances that cancer happens. Immune reprogramming, oncogenic activation from things like P53 and other things that usually are the systems that actually prevent us from developing cells that go awry. The spike protein specifically, but also COVID in general, and specifically the mRNA's ability to get to all kinds of areas of the body that we don't want, when they're wrapped in liponanoparticles, really are causing basically dysfunction at the cellular level that really wreaks havoc on people that might have been predisposed to having havoc wreaked on them in the first place.
Tell our audience, what is it that you exactly do in your labs and the research and what you discovered, Dr. Vaughn?
So a lot of what we found early in COVID was that the spike protein was able to actually activate the clotting system inappropriately and actually cause damage to the small vessels in the body. And again, a lot of things that we think about when we think about the cardiovascular system, we focus on the big vessels in a sense, the reason you get a coronary bypass or the reason somebody has a stroke. But the reality is a lot of where oxygen gets delivered and the ability for oxygen to get out to the cellular system in the body is dictated by where red blood cells actually kind of line up in a row, very small cells like red blood cells. And if that is dysfunctional, again, the microvascular system, it causes havoc all down the line. And so in a lot of ways, what we found was COVID was able to make fibrin, which is a fancy kind of term when we think about things for clotting, was able to produce fibrin out of fibrinogen in a way that made it, first of all, do it by itself without thrombin, but also it was resistant to fibrinolysis, which is a fancy word for we need our body to clot. But we also, when the body clots, we want the ability to get rid of the clotting mechanisms and the clotting outcomes through something called fibrinolysis or breakdown of the clots. And when that doesn't happen, it wreaks havoc in every system because every system in the body is dependent on adequate oxygen delivery through the microvasculature.
Dr. Donohue, your response to Dr. Vaughn?
Well, Dr. Vaughn makes a very important point, which is that the small vessels, the little tiny vessels, the capillaries, are really where the juice is delivered. So I have spent my career working in larger vessels, for example, 3.5, 4 millimeter vessels that feed, for example, the heart. All the vessels in the body, arteries, arterioles, capillaries, small veins, and big veins, Armstrong, are lined by a very intriguing single cell layer called the intima. The word intima comes actually from the Latin origin intimate, inside of. And that single cell layer is what promotes this smooth and regular flow of blood. Left to its own devices, as Dr. Vaughn suggested, blood would clot. So we need a kind of back and forth conversation between the tendency to clot and the tendency to bleed.
So, but then why are we seeing such an increase, and I know Dr. Vaughn touched on this, in blood clotting and vascular issues in post-COVID individuals, and what role do spike proteins and inflammation play in long-term cardiovascular health, Dr. Donohue?
Well, the answer is that there has been a very substantial increase in the occurrence of blood clots, both venous and arterial, in the wake of COVID infection. This has been studied carefully by Dr. Vaughn and others, and it turns out that the equation, that kind of back and forth between clotting and bleeding, has tilted on behalf of clotting. So, for example, we've seen, all of our viewers tonight can think of 2 or 3 famous athletes, some in the NBA, who have developed blood clots in the veins rather early in life. It also turns out that arteries have a new predisposition to clotting. And remember that clotting in the arteries is oftentimes a calamity or even end-of-life event. And this has been studied carefully. It's interesting that way back, Armstrong, in 1856, a doctor named Dr. Virchow described how blood clots. And he pointed out that if there's something wrong with the lining of the arteries, which there is here, and if there's a procoagulant state, which Dr. Vaughn just referred to, that really predisposes to unregulated blood clot formation. In the wake of the COVID pandemic, we've now persuasively seen both.
Dr. Vaughn, there's been a rise in young people experiencing heart disease. obviously, many want to know what's driving this, and then how reliable are mainstream health statistics when it comes to these emerging issues?
Well, one thing that's unique about how COVID specifically, a lot of times you'll hear about the concept of myocarditis. And the myocarditis that actually happens, especially in the vaccine related myocarditis, is in a sense a unique, especially when we look at biopsies, which would be looking at tissues themselves, because it has a eosinophilic or basically a hypersensitivity component to it, which again goes back to how the immune system is responding to the spike protein that is in the vaccines. And much to the chagrin of a lot of people, the reality is that myocarditis in the post-vaccine world is quite unique. And not only that, and I think Dr. Donohue would agree, in a young person, myocarditis is never mild. It might be mild in the way that we think about it in terms of getting you out of the hospital. But damage to the heart at a young age is something that no person, no athlete, no young person should ever have, because in a sense, the heart itself is not very regenerative. It's not able to actually, repair itself like other parts of your body. So at 15 or 16, to have something like myocarditis from a booster or a vaccine, it might be something that you're no longer in the hospital for. But in terms of the long-term consequences of having an injury to the heart at that young age, it is not something that ever needs to be taken lightly, like many of the physicians currently in the medical community have done.
But are you saying, though, that in some way COVID infection or having received the COVID vaccine is also a new risk for developing cancer?
So on the cancer standpoint, the other thing is that the more that I have learned in medicine, in many ways, I feel like the less I actually know. It's kind of one of those funny conundrums. But the deeper I dive in how the coagulation system and how your endothelium or the intima of the vessels works is related to how your body's ability to fight cancer and fight other diseases, or how your overall health is something that isn't disconnected. In fact, it is intimately woven in. And the way our body works is not, in a sense, the heart works this way and the coagulation system works this way, the ability for your immune system to get rid of bad cells works that way. Instead, it is a concert of things that work together. And when one of those things is dysfunctional, the whole system is dysfunctional. And I think that's what the broader understanding of how our body works together is really leading us to understanding damage or apparent damage in one system has consequences in so many other systems.
Your voice, your future. Dr. Vaughn, Dr. Donohue, we'll be back. Dr. Donohue, I mentioned the study in Japan, and I was curious or not whether there was a study in Japan that showed that patients who received multiple COVID vaccinations did worse.
So Armstrong, the relationship between cancer and COVID is an evolving relationship. Remember how long it took, for example, to clearly show that tobacco and lung cancer are related. So cancer is a mysterious process, and causality, therefore, is even yet at hand. The paper that you pointed to regarding pancreatic cancer patients was a single center study. There are lots of reasons, as Dr. Vaughn just suggested before the break, there are lots of reasons to think that the COVID infection and or vaccine may have a cancer-promoting effect, though data to date is lacking. How could it happen? Well, we've talked just even in the segment so far about chronic inflammation. It turns out that COVID and or the vaccine impact cell-based immunity. So it's immunity based on, if you will, memory, and that appears to be undermined under certain circumstances after the vaccine or after the infection. So it is not an outlandish premise to say that there may be a relationship. I think, on the other hand, we have to temper our enthusiasm about this. You know, it's not been so long since the COVID pandemic has effectively passed, and it will take time to flesh out whether these possible mechanisms are really real and obliging, or whether that's not the case. And the jury is simply not in.
But you know, Dr. Vaughn, many of us continue to hear that COVID virus has been found actively dividing and reproducing these cancerous tumors. Is this true?
Yes, so from some of the histopathology reports that we have in the literature, it does appear that some of these cancers, especially bowel as well as pancreatic cancers, have been not only the basically the footprint of COVID is on them, but even the reality that there is active replication that seems to be apparently continuing within the cells of these cancers. Again, that is I guess, the big question. And one of the things that really bothers me currently in the medical community is that we have not really wanted to figure out what's going on. And in some ways, we don't have a great assay. I mean, one of the things that my lab here in Birmingham continues to work with people like Dr. Robert Redfield on is even actually having a good assay for finding out where the spike is. Is it intracellular? Does it continue to reproduce? Is it just parts of the vaccine, or is it parts of COVID that continue to replicate? Is it the virus itself? A lot of those questions are still unanswered even 5 years into this. And the reality is, as much money as we've poured into this from especially the governmental side, it's fascinating and concerning to me that there has not been really a vigilance to figure that out. Instead, most of the reports are people that are just looking for something and finding it and then asking, how the heck did this continue to happen? We haven't been told about.
Well, let me tell you what's remarkable, what you're saying, is that the virus has been found within these cancerous lesions, is what you're saying here. And how can we be sure that the virus did not in some way actually cause the cancer itself? I mean, aren't there other viruses, Dr. Vaughn, that have been found to actually cause cancer?
Yeah, in fact, we have many viruses that cause cancer. I mean, that is something that, in fact, I mean, one of the most prominent vaccines that recently came on the market 10 years ago would be the HPV vaccine. And again, that has to do with human papillomavirus. And in a sense, it is the cause of specific types of cancer as well. So it's not surprising that viruses themselves are oncogenic, or a fancy word for saying that they can cause cancer.
So, Dr. Donohue, what with all these things that have been said, that we're saying here today, what are our listeners making of what they're hearing here tonight from you and Dr. Vaughn? Was going to get the shot? Now looking back, was it a good thing? Going forward, should they get the shot? Did they get too many shots? What's the balance here?
So that's of course the great question that neither Dr. Vaughn nor I nor any other right-minded authority can answer persuasively. I think.
But what does the science tell you so far?
Well, the science so far tells us that there's a theoretical mechanism through which either the COVID infection or the COVID vaccine could create a predisposition to certain types of malignancies. That is clearly a sound foundation. It takes a long time for this to flesh itself out, and I don't think we do anyone a service by suggesting that whoops, that was a big mistake, getting the vaccine. It's easy to forget where we were just 2 or 3 years ago in the context of this. I think like anything else, you can drown on the water you propose to drink. And so getting, 1 or 2 vaccines may have been a wise and prudent move. I have seen myocarditis that Dr. Vaughn and you were just talking about a moment ago that does clearly appear to relate to the number of vaccines that people get. So inflammation is the heart and soul of all of this. And myocarditis particularly is curious that there was a gender piece to this that occurred much more frequently in men, and particularly young men, really does suggest a kind of underlying disruption of the immune surveillance that occurred either in the context of the illness or in the vaccine to prevent or mitigate the illness.
Dr. Vaughn, I've never had the vaccine. I've never had COVID, not even a whiff of it. And I travel like a madman all around the world. But there is now this powerful, Dr. Vaughn, anti-vax movement, even from within our own federal government. We are now hearing very mixed signals about vaccination, particularly with kids. You have reviewed it with us. There's just so many things that are going here. I'm just trying to figure out, for those that are listening to us today, about the broader reluctance of the population now to receive vaccines. From your research, what do you say to them?
Well, getting back to the more I know, the less I think I actually know. The reality is that the immune system in many ways is one of the kind of last bastions of understanding for us in medical science. And as simple as antibodies and cellular immunity was in terms of what we were taught in the 90s and really the beginning of this century, the reality is the immune system and its effects on many other systems is much more complex than we really ever understood. And in that sense, what I would tell people is poking the bear, again, the bear being the immune system, as much as we do, may not always have the effects that we want it to have. It might prevent one thing, but at the consequence of another. And I think that's one thing that needs to be reevaluated when we think about prompting or poking the immune system as many times as we are currently doing it to our children and adults.
But why haven't we looked at people like myself? I know many people who've never taken a vaccination, never had COVID, never been sick. Why don't we study, what is it about what they do that we can learn from?
Well, I think that's something we need to learn from. I think we need to learn it from different communities as well. I think the Washington Post actually a week ago had an article wondering why a certain sect of the Amish have no allergies. And, again, I'm not giving you the answer to why that is, but it could be that they don't participate in vaccinations as readily as the rest of the community.
So Dr. Donohue, what are the most preventable chronic illnesses, and why aren't we preventing them? And how do the diet, the sleep, and the movement directly influence vascular and heart health? I mean, what are these key warning signs your body gives before serious illness even set in?
Well, Armstrong, that's one of the problems of vascular disease at the level that I care for patients with, meaning larger arteries, is that oftentimes there are no signs. That's why there's some 350,000 people a year in and year out, who die of out-of-hospital sudden cardiac death. They weren't poorly informed. They didn't have symptoms they didn't ignore. The worst expression of the disease was the first expression of that disease. And so it is the case, on the other hand, that there's nothing more exciting right now in medicine than prevention. Remember that Hippocrates said it's the job of the right-minded doctor first to prevent disease, If he fails doing that, he is to treat disease. If he fails doing that, he is to ease human suffering. We have kind of forgotten about that little triad. And prevention now has tremendous bona fides. I think it's true that if we simply applied what we now know to the area of vascular disease, that we could essentially eliminate the largest source of human mortality that there is. So we have very good data, for example, that even when plaque narrowing is well established, even when it's limiting the supply of blood to the heart, in my case, turns out that modifying risk factors aggressively, not in this kind of half-hearted way, but really lowering vascular risk, and these arteries heal, that means that plaque narrowing begins to disappear like the snow in Vermont in May. So that is something that we really, truly need to give earnest thought to. It's not a spectator sport. And so, for example, you made the point about body mass. It's this tremendously disturbing thing that we have this pandemic of obesity. And it's probably a new pandemic. It's probably something that wasn't the case in prior centuries. It distorts everything. And so we think that there's, for all of us, we should weigh throughout our lives what we weighed or should have weighed at 21. Most of what we eat is a function of what mother fed us. So it's an unexamined premise. Everything that goes beyond the barrier of our teeth should be an examined premise, just like the words that we use. So a much more thoughtful approach to diet, living a little bit more Armstrong in accordance with the kind of laws of nature, up early in the morning, not so many calories in the morning. Most of our calories should come at between noon and 2. Calories should not come after 6 in the evening, and then early to bed, remembering that 1 hour of sleep before midnight is worth 2 hours of sleep after midnight. So if you walk with the wind at your back, it's a different experience than walking with the wind in your face, meaning if you are always contradicting the laws of nature, even without knowing it, you incur the consequences.
Dr. Jordan Vaughn and Dr. Bryan Donohue, your voice, your future. We'll be back.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. So, Dr. Vaughn, I want to come back to where we started this conversation, the incredible rise of cancer among young people. And in my experience, this is a new and deeply concerning trend, particularly for parents. If it's true, could COVID or the COVID vaccines be the basis upon which these horrible cancers, terrible cancers, are now seen in our younger generation? Something that we have seen before. Is this something new? Is it?
It definitely could be. And the reason is because the unique nature of COVID and the spike protein, both from COVID and the vaccine. because, in a sense, and this is something talking to Dr. Redfield, who used to be head of the CDC, is the glycosylation on the spike protein, which is a fancy word for how it presents itself in the body, really evades what we would typically call innate immunity. And innate immunity, in many ways, is kind of like the alarm system, the first response for your body to respond. And because it evades that, it allows it to really take hold and cause issues that are multi-systems and cause chronic inflammation in ways that we have never seen before, especially on a level where a disease affects a whole, basically, world in such a short time span. And that is why I think we are seeing such a dramatic change in statistics that we really have never seen before.
You know, Dr. Donohue, a top U.S. medical body has expressed deep concern to the Secretary of HHS over the news that the Health Secretary plans to overhaul a panel that determines which preventative health measures, including cancer screenings, should be covered by insurance companies.
You know, Armstrong, we've all had the occasion of maybe losing a little bit of trust and faith in the government. And here's another reason why. So what's happening, in my judgment, in the department is that we're looking really more for ideologues than accomplished scientists. And that's such a treacherous thing. The goal of being a servant is not about yourself. It's not to promote a worldview or a way of being. It's just to better provide services to the consuming public. It's very disturbing to me that very highly thought of, very even-tempered and accomplished immunologists and experts in vaccine and infectious disease have been summarily dismissed. And what we see now is a kind of new red guard, people who all share in a single ideology. And I'm concerned about that. And I was frankly concerned about that at the time of the nomination of Mr. Kennedy to this post. Having said that, you know, there are some early suggestions that berating vaccines is not a useful strategy, just like always embracing vaccines. So it's interesting to think that most of my young trainees have never seen a case of measles. And that's because people in their 50s and 60s were largely vaccinated with the MMR vaccine. So look, I don't want to get over our skis here. Lots of vaccines are tried and true and safe, and their use should be encouraged. What's happening in Texas is a reminder, I think, of what happens when ideology nudges out good and circumspect science. You know, it's interesting that measles isn't always a rash and some itching and a little bit of discomfort. If you get measles, if you get encephalitis, you have about a 1 in 5 chance of not surviving that. And we've seen that also here in Texas. So really best that we just take the scale firm in hand and go where the science is taking us, not where our ideological prerequisites.
You know, Dr. Vaughn, the Secretary says the panel is woke and it does more harm than good. Are you in agreement with Dr. Donohue?
I definitely think if the last 5 years have been any good indication of what our leaders were basically trustworthy in a sense, I think to rebuild that trust requires a changing of the guard. And definitely, I think you need a balanced and in many ways an equiposed type panel. But the problem is, in many of these panels, their conflicts of interest are significant, as well as their rubber stamping of everything that comes through has, you know, many of these panels vote 17-0. That is not science to me. And in fact, I think robust discussion and disagreement is the foundation of science. And when everything goes through 17-0, 12-0, you might need to find a different voting panel.
So let me just stick with you, because there's other news coming out of the Department of Health and Human Services, which finds that systemic disregard for the sanctity of life in organ transplant systems. Their findings show that hospitals, Dr. Vaughn, allowed the organ procurement process to begin when the patient showed signs of life. Wouldn't you think this is horrifying? I mean, the organ procurement organizations that coordinate access to transplant, don't you think they need to be held accountable? I mean, the Secretary feels the entire system must be repaired to ensure that every potential donor's life is treated with the sanctity it deserves. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the testimony from some of those cases where even the nurses were alarmed that the patient was waking up to find out that they were about to be, in a sense, harvested. And this is from the testimony itself, again, is quite concerning when we think about the trust that we have put in our system to make those basically determinations of when somebody is no longer alive and when they can utilize the organs for donation to help others. So in a sense, what we have to do is reform that system to make sure that never happens again. And at the same time, restore trust in people that sign organ donation on their license, to make them have the trust that that will only happen when they are no longer of the living. And again, that is the important part of this, because without that, the system fails. And so when the system is completely balanced toward we need all the organs we can get and we're going to cut the corners, that is something that is not only going to make the outcome awful, but even the ability for us to procure or even have the access to organs all of a sudden no longer exist. So again, reestablishing trust in the system is what's important. And in many ways, that requires radical disruption. And I think for good or for bad, that is one thing that RFK Jr. is basically addressing head on, which is radical disruption of a system that, at least in the last 5 years, failed us in many ways. And the more that is revealed in other systems, like the organ procurement system, it is something that has to be addressed head on, and trust must be restored, or that system will no longer function at all.
You know, Dr. Donohue, I'm just sitting here imagining waking up and someone is harvesting your organs, because, I mean, that is truly a horror show. I'll give you a chance to respond, Dr. Donohue, because I can tell you have something to say.
Well, I think the premise is one that we've discussed before on this show a number of times, probably worth reiterating now, and that is that the respect for life is tantamount in the various ways in which life expresses itself. So of course it's the case that people need to be clinically dead before their organs are harvested. There's no more meetings of the Flat Earth Society. That argument is straightforward and clear. And it is the case. My institution is maybe the largest performing institution of transplants across the board in the world. There has been, I think, in the transplant community, a little bit more eagerness to step on the gas before the light has really changed. And of course, there's reasons for that, but I think that the hard endpoints are the hard endpoints for good reason. So I actually wrote a paper years ago looking at the EKGs on patients who received a heart and compared those EKGs with the EKG before the donation was made, which meant I had to find out who the donors were, which is a very difficult thing, as it turns out, to do. Most of the donors in the 90s were young, healthy people who tragically succumbed to gunshot wound to the head, and there was no doubt about their status. It's a much more nuanced thing now. and the rapacious appetite for organs to kind of fuel the system is something we have to, I think, attempt back a little bit. And in that sense, I agree with Dr. Vaughn.
Your final thoughts, Dr. Vaughn? We sure appreciate having you on for the first time tonight. Hope to have you back more on in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that medicine is, to me, is the relationship between a patient and a physician, and the unique aspect and really the privilege of being a doctor and not just a bench scientist is we get to take care of people that are both physical as well as spiritual. And I think what you saw, especially in the response to COVID over the last 5 years, is in many ways our authorities, especially our health authorities and the bureaucracy that goes along with them, does not really understand that relationship. And we have to get back to understanding that the foundation of medicine is really taking care of another human being that is not just a lab rat. And in fact, they are a person both in physical and in spiritual. And until we get back to that, medicine will continue to suffer, and people's trust in doctors will suffer with it.
Dr. Vaughn, thank you for saying that. The Hippocratic Oath of Medicine is first, do no harm. Thank you, and Dr. Donohue, so much for joining me. Kelly Ryerson is up next from MAHA, Make America Healthy Again. I hope you enjoyed this segment on health and cancer and COVID as much as I did. It was riveting, and we'll be back.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
Kelly Ryerson, also known as Glyphosate Girl, is here to break down a quiet but dangerous bill in Congress that could weaken how we regulate toxic chemicals. Welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's really a crisis moment, and this is an issue that I don't think many people are aware of at the moment, of what is actually happening in DC. So just getting right into it, we are in a real state of complete corporate capture of our regulators, which is nothing new probably to your audience. What is happening now is that Bayer, the pharmaceutical company that bought Monsanto in 2018, they've had tons of lawsuits because glyphosate has been connected to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So there's this big body of research that connects glyphosate and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Well, these lawsuits have now been there's so many lawsuits that now Bayer has had to put aside $16 billion to pay for settlements. And there's no end in sight because Bayer is unwilling to put a label on the side of any glyphosate Roundup package and say this has been shown in some research to be connected with the development of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Instead of that, they are going and they are trying to get immunity from lawsuits by taking away all Americans' rights to sue. So this is what's happening right now in Congress, is that slid into the spending appropriations bill is a section called 453. And it is making it so that if this passes, then the current regulation, so let's use, in this case, glyphosate. Glyphosate right now is not considered a carcinogen. If Bayer were to say, oh, actually, there's research that connects it to being a carcinogen, they would no longer be able to update the label at the EPA because the EPA is effectively freezing all current regulations into place and making it so that it would be maybe 10, 20 years before a new assessment would be done.
I'm a farmer, and I know about herbicides and Roundup and its connection to glyphosate. And so what you're saying to us is that this bill favors big agriculture and the powerful corporations that dominate our food system and could strip away these key health protections. I know you talked about who's behind it and what it means for your health and your family's future, but talk about how members of Congress, knowing what it will do, how could they go along? I mean, this is like a slow death.
It is entirely a slow death. And just to add to what's at stake here, we are talking about supporting legislation that supports foreign chemical manufacturers. So this is Germany, this is ChemChina in China, the Chinese government arm. They own one of these big chemical companies. So what we're talking about is these Congress people putting in place immunity so that Americans will get sick from the poisons, but we can't sue these foreign chemical manufacturers. This is crazy. This is bringing beyond just supporting the farmer, and they're saying that it's on behalf of the farmer. Meanwhile, actually, in a lot of focus groups, farmers are very concerned about this legislation because even if they don't think that they're getting cancer from Roundup or Parkinson's from paraquat, they're very concerned that when chemical companies have no responsibility and can't get sued, that they can put whatever they want to out on the market.
Well, who benefits from this? Who benefits from this slow death of America?
The only one that's going to benefit are the corporations. They are going to have all the profit. They can sell whatever they want to onto the market and make this profit off of us. And, it's going back to what you just asked about, like, what is going through their mind in Congress. Like, I cannot conceive of what is going through their mind when they have to live in this same country we do and are going to get exposed to these chemicals with no ability to sue these manufacturers. They and their families are subjected to the same thing. So I just smell something so deeply corrupt. And I think that Bayer and the chemical manufacturers have been potentially not just outright bribing, but also telling mistruths. So there are a lot of stories that these Congress people are telling saying this isn't actually a liability shield. Maha has it wrong. It's not a liability shield. It is definitely a liability shield, but it takes a second to even understand that.
I don't even understand their ability to weaken the EPA's evaluation of this chemical safety. And you think about it, what are the most dangerous chemicals currently in our food supply, and how did they get there in the first place?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
What are the most dangerous chemicals in our food supply, and how did they get there in the first place?
Oh my gosh. So we have so many that are really dangerous. So of course, glyphosate is one of them. Actually, it's less toxic than some of the more egregious ones. Atrazine is another one that's actually in our drinking water that is horrendous, and it's connected to all kinds of endocrine disruption and hormone changes. We have paraquat that is so deeply tied. It's banned in China, sold here, so deeply tied to Parkinson's disease. Glyphosate has been connected with everything from cancer to ruining our microbiome to autoimmunity to ADHD to infertility. It's found in semen. It's shown to kill sperm. And this means it crosses the blood-testes barrier. And I've actually brought this single-handedly to the EPA, showed them the evidence. It's nothing I'm making up. Scientists put this together, and they're blatantly ignoring it while we have a complete fertility crisis in this country. It's unbelievable.
Do we need to follow the money?
Let's follow the money.
Yeah.
That's the issue.
Yeah.
It's the same old story. It's the same thing with pharma. It's the same thing with oil and gas. We need to go follow the money, see who's being paid. And by the way, this isn't, it appeared to be primarily Republicans. However, this in the past, there have been 2 other attempts to pass this legislation, and it's been a bipartisan push. So you can't even push it and say that it's one particular party. This is just gross corruption across the board. And I frankly think that there's going to be a lot of problems because people are waking up to these issues and they're going to vote accordingly. So if I were those Congress people, I'd be watching their backs because they may not be sitting in that seat much longer.
Talk about the lobbyists and the role that they're playing in shaping our agricultural and environmental laws and the kind of sway that they have. And there are links between chemical exposure and rising rates of autoimmune disease and this infertility and cancer that you talked about, reproductive rights, and impacts the nervous system. They all know this, but they don't care.
They don't care. They know it. They don't care. their reaction to even the fact that in the Maha report that maybe there was a hint that maybe pesticides are contributing to the chronic disease, that has been their mode now to panic and lock down and come back harder than we have ever seen. I've never seen a push from chemical agriculture like I am at this moment. And I think it's a complete disservice because there are alternatives for farmers. And I'm not even talking organic. I'm talking about the farmer actually making a profit for once by restoring soil health and having less need to be spending all the money on these inputs. There's such a beautiful way out that makes everyone whole on this. And this doubling down by and just the directives that are coming from the chemical companies are just out of control. I've never seen it this alive in DC.
What action steps can viewers take to oppose this legislation or demand better regulation? Because if the bill passes, we know what the long-term consequences for the food, the soil, and the future generations.
The best thing that you can do right now is, even if you're not an activist, get active this second. It is absolutely the time. This will matter for your children, your grandchildren. If you intend on getting pregnant anytime soon, now is definitely the time to get involved, just to make sure that you aren't exposed any more than you have to be. What you can do, though, actively to take on Congress is you can call your representatives, call your senator, call your congresspeople, and tell them you oppose any language in any bill that will give chemical companies immunity from lawsuits. Okay, that's number one. Number two, you can go to stoppoison.org and you can fill out a form, and then you will be mailed specific calls to action. So exactly who you need to call, scripts that you need to say, and this would be calling people even from other states, because you are an American. They are making decisions on your behalf, and so you have every right to be doing this.
It is a fact. Americans are being poisoned. I mean, the regulations are loose. I just returned from London, and the food, the drinks, it just tastes so different, so much better. You know it is a priority for the European Union and also for the UK. But you would think that in a country like the United States, they would have the same priority and would lead the way for the rest of the world, but they don't.
Well, and it's really, I feel guilty when I hear that our head of the USDA is going and effectively forcing our toxic food on other countries in trade deals. They don't want it. They've taken a look at what's happened in the United States. They see we're messed up. We are so sick. They have no intention of eating our food. Similarly, in Mexico said, hey, we're not taking your GMO corn anymore. We're a corn-based society. We eat so much corn, we're not going to take it anymore. The United States went toe-to-toe with them, forced them to continue to take it. So who are we? I don't think that this is the America that I know.
That is the question. That's the question that we got to leave this on. Yep. Who are we? If you don't like who we are, reach out to your legislatures, reach out your power. You have the power. One person with courage and conviction makes a majority in this country. Kelly Ryerson, thank you so much for joining us from the Washington Beacon. Look forward to hearing more from you in the future. I'm Armstrong Williams. I want to thank all our doctors who joined us tonight. Good night, everybody. Your voice, your future.